Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Monica.
So today we are beyond excited to be speaking to Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas is an award winning author and documentarian who is named one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals by MIT. He's the author of more than 20 books, including Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires, and my personal favorite, Team Human, which is a manifesto that outlines his most urgent thoughts on civilization and human nature.
Douglas is a regular contributor to publications like CNN, The Daily Beast, and The Guardian. He has also made documentaries for PBS Frontline, including Generation Like and Merchants of Cool. He is a research fellow of the Institute for the Future and the founder of the Laboratory for Digital Humanism at SUNY Queens, where he also serves as a professor of the media theory and digital economies.
Douglas's work grapples with big issues like technology, capitalism, consumerism, and human nature. He argues that modern technology isolates us instead of bringing us together, with social media algorithms and corporate interests chipping away at the traits that make us the most human. In this pushback, he calls for greater focus on building strong local communities, mutual aid, and really going against the digital landscape that feels like it just takes and takes and takes from us.
We were thrilled to catch up with Douglas to talk about learning from nature, building community, and all of the messy, wonderful things that make us most human.
So excited. Here we go. Douglas, we are absolutely thrilled to have you on Biophilic Solutions. We really, really appreciate you joining us today. We know you're a busy man. And one of the places we wanted to sort of kick off is sort of the meeting you had with the tech billionaires in your latest book. And for listeners who haven't heard it, it's a pretty astounding story. But I think it sets the stage nicely for the core issues that your work is, and also sort of where we are today, where we have found ourselves today in this very much of a quagmire.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I just got back from book tour in Europe for this book, and it's everyone wants me to tell the story, and I keep thinking about how do you tell a story? It's become like I don't know, like when Patrick Stewart did Christmas Carol, or when you stuck doing a part. I mean, to
Well,
make
we
a
don't mean to
long
trot you
story
out.
short,
Yeah.
right? Sorry, to make a long story short, I mean, I get invited to or used to anyway, to tech bro conferences all the time and investor conferences, really as a form of entertainment. And there was one of these hedge fund tech bro conferences where people had the option of either like making an omelet with Emerald or spending an hour with a futurist. Five guys came to spend an hour with a futurist. They, started asking me all these investing questions, which isn't what you ask someone like me. And I can tell you what's going on, but I would say Betamax instead of
Yeah,
VHS, or CompuServe instead of AOL. Right? So I know it's
100%.
coming. I just can't tell you which way to bet. And then they got to the question of Alaska or New Zealand. Where should they put their resort bunker hideaway for the apocalypse? And found that provocative, I guess. So I got a little triggered into teasing them about the ness of their plan, that they think that they could somehow protect themselves from the pandemic or nuclear war or social unrest or climate change catastrophe that annihilates the rest of us and lets them live on, indefinitely in some protected bunker. So I would ask them things like, how are you going to protect your bunker from the rest of us? And they'd say, oh, we've got Navy SEALs and Army Rangers coming to protect us. And so finally I asked, how are you going to pay your Navy SEALs after your money's worthless? And they hadn't even considered that. We spend the rest of the hour just looking at that question. How do you maintain control over that? I mean, which kind of becomes a metaphor for the way they're living now. How do you maintain control over a country or a population using, technology and surveillance and money and propaganda and religion and everything else you can? But what struck me was just the powerlessness of these seemingly powerful people, their inability to challenge the underlying assumptions that capitalism will stay, that all you can really do is prepare for the inevitable, that they don't feel that they have any creative capacity over our collective future. And that's when I realized, that all the money and power really doesn't help them. They just want to try to escape from the damage they're creating by earning money in that way.
Yeah, no, we talk a lot about that. This podcast and sort of like Jen and our philosophy, just from the work that we've done, is really about we need nature and we need each other. And if we don't have those two things, I don't want to say we have nothing, but we pretty much are soulless, right?
Right. Then you even get to the place of what's the difference
Mm.
Mm,
Mhm.
between nature and each other, right?
I don't know. Talk
When
about that.
well, you're saying we need nature and we need each other as
Hmm.
if each other is something apart
Good
from
point.
nature,
No, I
you
think
know?
that's a fabulous point.
So all we need is nature, you
All we
know?
need is nature. Yes.
And in some sense, yeah, when you reconnect with it, I mean, I think it's really easiest in some ways for humans to do it with humans. I mean, if you're gonna, the ways to do it are just so simple. People don't get it. Like spooning for me is a way of connecting with people and with nature at the same time, right? You feel your heart center open and it's that whole thing, or, ecstatic dance, or all
Mhm.
these things you can do, all the sort of more doula like compassionate activities kind of
Yes.
reconnect you with your soul aliveness thing.
That's exactly it, Douglas. I think also you always talk about, connection to self through our lived experiences. Yet the world today, and what you talk about a lot, is that these tech bros and everyone else is trying to say, no, 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 we're supposed to be separate, live in our goggles, live in our devices, and forget the rest of the world because that's just too messy. And it's kind of beneath us as humans. Like we should just be going straight towards technology and forgetting the human aspect that we're human beings that need each other to survive. And we are creative and we're fruitful and we're visionaries, but yet we're supposed to be going towards this apocalyptic kind of outlook.
Well, and I have, so this is how I
Oh,
was
yeah.
introduced to you back when this came out in 2019. And I don't know if I found the podcast first or the book first or how I came across it, but it was an education into itself, right? And so the Team Human book that I was just holding up, you know, talks about, I mean, it felt like, and I think you call it even a manifesto of your work, like it was sort of your like throwdown, right? And one of the things that struck me in it was sort of the discussion on capitalism, right? Somebody who, I'm in my mid 50s, like that's just been part of the world, right? I grew up under Reagan and my parents were Republicans. I grew up in a kind of a conservative town and, greed is good. And, I don't even know, Pretty in Pink, everything just sort of like was all about the things, right? That you're going to get the BMW or going to get the job. And I think this, not that I hadn't in age and, learning sort of understood the negativities, but it really struck me of how modern technology and capitalism were coming together in this like really negative way to divide us versus nature, which connects us. And just to put a fine point on the nature is like we are nature, and that's biophilia. We are part of it, the animals, the plants, us, and you cannot separate us. So I love that you made that point that they're not separate. But how is this? Like, why are we getting so divided? Like, what is going on with,
I mean, it's pretty simple, really. I mean, we originally, of course, most technology and the internet and all were developed to enable defense capabilities or war capabilities. I
mm,
mean, everything
mm,
is like that from, I'm sure, even language and, some violent intention. But um, the internet, as it became once it became available to people, it was a very socially connecting
Mm.
technology. People who had been alienated by television were
hmm
suddenly talking to each other through their monitors and turning each other into content. And people who were having those experiences sounded very psychedelic, the way they talked about the world. Oh, we're all different nodes on this network. We're all connected in one big being. Everything is fractal. The Gaia hypothesis is being realized. And we're the brain now connecting with these wires to,
Mm.
to be able to express the planetary agenda. But the big problem was people who were connected and doing those things were spending a lot less money. The average internet connected home was watching 9 hours less commercial television a week. And that was really frightening to the media and commercial empires.
Mhm.
So they intentionally changed the nature and polarity of the internet from being something that connected people in new ways to something that could control people in new ways. So they turned the internet, everyone's connection, into a kind of a Skinner box
Mm,
of psychological manipulation and social control. And as you know, if you want to manipulate someone, it's easier to have them afraid and isolated and disconnected from any other source of positive reinforcement. You can't have a Skinner box and somebody reaching in and petting the rat every once in a while. But you got to leave them alone.
Yeah.
So that's what they did, and we've been living in that intentionally isolating, alienating, frightening box. It's using every Pavlovian cue to make us, to
hmm.
separate us from our nature.
Yeah.
And that's why we're like this. And then you have people who are raised on that becoming the new heads of technology companies, and you get a kind of a feedback loop of horror. But it's old. I mean, you guys at Biophilia know this is an old thing. This goes back to at least Francis Bacon and the invention of
Hmm.
empirical science. We're going to take nature by the forelock, hold her down, and submit her to
Yes.
our will.
Right.
I mean, that was what now,
Mhm.
so now we're it's that same, you can call it, toxic masculinity, but it's just the same civilization. There were a lot of toxic women burning witches too. Archetypally toxically male, intentional separation from nature in order to control it. You understand nature by deanimating it. You catch the butterfly, you kill it, you stick a pin in it, and then you say, what is it? And now you still don't know how it flies, right? Because you're afraid of the living thing. But they're afraid of the same stuff. They're afraid of living things. They're afraid of us. They're afraid of women. They're afraid of moisture. They're afraid of nature. Afraid of worms.
Dirt.
Afraid of dirt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
we
my
talk about
gosh.
that all the time that, people are scared to get out in the woods or in the trails because of what's out there, right? And it's like those things are probably more scared of us than the bobcat's going to keep going or he's not going to come out. The snakes are going to cruise away or just you can back away. But we have created the fear of the woods, if you will, right? And for
Well,
some
some of it
legitimate
was
reasons.
justified.
Yeah,
We'd
some of
walk
it is.
around, a saber-toothed tiger's going to jump on your head.
Yeah,
It wasn't good.
yeah. But
Well, yeah.
today,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we put a box around ourselves, and like Douglas, you understand. Like I'm from the Bronx, and if it weren't for my parents, I could have been indoors all the time because it could be noisy and scary and create biophobia. But my parents brought me to the botanical gardens in Central Park and taught me about the outdoors. Otherwise, it could be scary. So how are you educated on why it matters? I think is the most important thing, and what it means to be human is connection to all other living things. Really.
Yeah. And, some science is finally getting around to it. I mean, how long did it take them to acknowledge, like, the gut biome?
yes.
Right. So it's like, oh my God, you mean there's more of them than us? And there's all this bacteria inside. And maybe the thing that attracts me to that woman over there is not me, but is my gut biome wants to mix with hers. What's that? We're
Right.
just the medium for the exchange of all these other things.
Yeah, I thought was it Pollen's, maybe first book or early book about Johnny Appleseed that like did we cultivate the apple or the apple cultivate us?
Mhm.
And I just thought that that was a wonderful who's driving the bus here? We don't know.
Right.
So to talk about nature as a collaborative act, ecosystems are super important to rebuilding communities. You talk a lot about collaboration and local over competition, and I think that the internet, the web, social media, whatever, however we want to define it, has become this individualist sport where we have to create I have to be a brand. I don't want to be a
Mm.
brand. I have to, increase my followers. How do I promote? It's this cycle, or it's not even a cycle. It's just like more and more and more and more. It's a linear thing. So talk about collaboration and your thoughts on nature as a collaborative act, because I love that term.
Yeah. I mean, it goes pretty deep. I'm sure you all talked about it a lot on the show, the way that, libertarians and capitalists kind of cherry picked a strange argument about competition from
Mm.
Charles Darwin's work.
Mhm.
And Darwin does have the concept of survival of the fittest individual in like a paragraph in one book, but his work is really about the way that different species cooperate and collaborate in order to ensure mutual survival, that different things fit into each other, into these ecosystems that achieve sustainability. We get taught by well-meaning but misguided middle school science teachers, that the big tree is competing for sunlight against the little tree and crowds out the little tree so the little tree will wither and the big one at the top of the canopy will live. And it's like that's not actually what happens. It's the
Mhm.
big tree shares its sunlight with the little tree during the summer, and then when the deciduous tree loses its leaves in the winter, the little tree, the evergreen, shares its nutrients with the big tree, through a network of mycelia. So what's going on there is at least three, but actually thousands of different species are collaborating and cooperating to make sure that they can all survive because they're all depending on each other. So then if you look at the forest as this collaborative act, this connected multifaceted being, then you start looking at human civilization differently too.
Hmm.
And again, when we're healthy is when we're in cooperation with
Hmm.
each other, when we're social with each other, when we feel free to borrow things from our neighbors and to share stuff. The problem is the more people share, the worse that is for capitalism. If you have one lawnmower on the block that everyone uses for a couple of hours a week, the lawnmower company is selling fewer lawnmowers. So it's to the lawnmower company's advantage for us to compete with our lawns rather than share with our machines. And that ends up breeding a competitive, alienated society. It's
Yeah.
better. It's not actually better for the economy. It's better for a very specific economy, written by monarchs in the 12th
Hmm.
century trying to prevent the rise of the middle class. It's a longer story, but there were sort of much more collaborative economic models in the late Middle Ages that were working to bring great wealth and prosperity to lots of people throughout Europe. But the monarchy, the lords, the aristocracy couldn't maintain their power. Peasants were now trading and working for each other and playing. And so to this day, we end up with a kind of capitalism that promotes, an iPhone, not a Wii phone.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and it's interesting, my son is 20, and he is a computer science game design major, and he doesn't want he's on the iPhone, we're all on a family plan, and, you want one, you want us to pay for it, that's what you're on, right? But he wants, I guess there's maybe a phone you can build, like, his computer is for his graduation gift was, like, a computer that he built, and he can replace everything, right? Because capitalism also says, like, you can't, I don't even know how to get into this thing, and if I had to fix it, you have to take it somewhere, right? Like, they won't let us fix anything anymore. Like, where's the I don't even know, I can't even find a cobbler, to fix my
Yeah.
shoes.
Well, that's
Yeah.
because if people can create value in any situation, it means that the corporation has leaked value.
Mhm.
So if you're
Yeah.
a BMW or something, you sold the car, and now if mechanics are putting in their labor to repair it, that's value that you're not getting. So
Hmm.
instead, you'd rather people have to take it to the dealer and buy a new computer, so just install a giant component that only the company can create. And Biden was trying to create laws, right, to repair,
Yep.
to prevent that.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's all
So
out the
I have
window.
a question though. I know, don't even get me started on that. It's a whole different that will take a few hours.
Mhm.
I'm really curious because I know, you get hired to speak a lot and you meet with a lot of big, large corporations as a futurist. And what they're talking about is a lot about consumerism and capitalism. But Team Human is all about how do we scale back. So I'm wondering how, when you speak to them, I know they know what they're getting, but are they surprised by your message, or is there any friction usually between what you talk about and what they want from you, maybe?
I mean, it depends. I mean, I'm not a futurist. People call me one because it's something, but futurists are basically propagandists. They're
Okay.
they're describing futures in which they are going to figure prominently. It's there are these people on LinkedIn. They'll say futurist keynote speaker. You know,
Yeah.
what is that? As if that's some kind of a job. You can't be a futurist and a keynote speaker. What do you
Mhm.
do? What do you do? Are you a scientist? Are you a writer? Are you a
Yeah.
philosopher? What are you? Keynote speaker. It's like, and some people have that first, which is really weird. And that's how you know they're probably terrible, right? Seriously, who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? I guess someone who's trying to get jobs as a speaker. So
Yeah.
no, I mean they used to bring me because I've been doing this a long time. They used to bring me because I was the guy who said the internet is coming
Mm.
before people believed it. Right, my first book on the internet was canceled in 1992 before it came out because the publisher thought the internet would be over by
Wow.
1993 when it was supposed to be published. So stuff like that. I was the guy who coined, viral media, or even social media, it turns out, and predicted the .com crash and things like that. When if somebody's saying the internet's coming, hey, the internet's coming, and then the internet comes, so then they hire you for a while because it's like, oh, you're the guy who knows about this thing, and they didn't know. I mean, in the early days, it was like, what's the web?
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, or what's social media, or what's Web 2, or what's virtual reality, what's artificial intelligence. They sort of wanted to know that. And I always use the platform to do what we're doing here today, which is to say, look, since really about 1993 is when I kind of had my internet disillusionment moment. I was really excited about it from like 91 and 92. And then 93, Wired magazine came out and said that this weird psychedelic social, internet means nothing. This is about business. So, and this is about capitalism. And that was when I saw that we were no longer talking about giving tools to people, but using tools on people.
Yes.
And what would that do? So all of my talks since then have really been one way or another about how to rehumanize, renaturalize, how to, recognize the artificiality of capitalism and these structures that we're using, and see instead the opportunity to actually
Hmm.
reprogram our culture, our society, in new collaborative, cooperative, peer-to-peer ways. How do we retrieve that peer-to-peer ethos, right, of the late Middle Ages, of the pre-industrial moment, the church commons, the paganism, women, plants, the whole thing. So they would hire me originally because they had to, because there was no one else who could talk intelligently about this stuff. There were a few of us. And then they started hiring me as proof that they could listen to, that they could accept this.
Mm.
I was like the counterculture. It's like, oh, we can bring in a Rushkoff to stir things up. And then finally they bring me because now they see that I'm inspiring, you know, with something like Team Human. They see that, oh, there's a choice other than apocalypse, that people could have fun at work, that people could connect, that there's a way, like human resources people love Team Human as a book because it's like, oh,
Sure.
there's a team of people who are working together and enjoying each other, and and
The
and
human
that.
species.
They
But
maybe haven't fully read
yeah,
to understand.
well, but they mean
I
it.
mean, they
The
do. No,
most human resources people don't think that they're just exploiting workers and killing them, right? They
Mm.
do want to create a culture that serves the employees as well as everyone else. They're kind of between a rock and a hard place, but
no. Our
everyone does.
HR
Everyone
lady is
does.
she's like our like mother hen. It's amazing. She's always doing great stuff. So I don't mean
Aw.
any disparagement to that. It's more that it's so much more. I feel like it's
Yeah.
so much more than bringing people together. And I want to sort of, well, I have two questions, and so maybe I'll ask this is a little off what we were sort of going to talk about, but the tendency of seeing human beings as like we kind of talked about, the problem. We're messy. You really can't tell somebody what to do, right? I mean, we can try and trick them into that stuff, but like, I have children, like you can't get them to do things,
Right.
And so we become I don't know if it's the cog, but I think you say like we're the labor, right? We're the product with social
Mhm.
media. And I think there have been like documentaries and the social network and a lot of wonderful is it the anxious generation with the Jonathan Haidt, I believe. There's so much great research and content out there telling us that we are being used basically, right? I mean, I'm on social media. I'm perpetuating that. How do we get through to people to get them to recognize it? Because we feel that, or I'll speak for myself. I feel like, well, I kind of understand what they're doing. I work in marketing. I have to be on it to know what our brand. Da 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 da. I make excuses of why I can't get off it all. What do you like? What are you hearing from people? Do you see a shift happening? Are you hopeful that people are starting to understand we're being used?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of questions packed in there.
Sorry, yeah, I know. That's what I do.
You do.
Choose one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start at the end. Just because people know they're being used doesn't mean they would necessarily want to unpack or deconstruct the systems of abuse. They
Mm.
often just want to get into the role of the abuser rather than the abusee,
Mhm.
Ugh.
right? So if you don't if you accept the underlying architecture as a condition of nature, then you'll just look to get a better role within it. Most of my work has been very consciously um, structured uh, to avoid the sentence that you used, which was, "How do we get people to dot dot
Mm.
dot?"
Mhm.
Because how do we get people to see this or do that or realize this? Then we're back in the role of the entity that's operating human beings, right? Because
Mm.
the
Yes. Oh,
advertisers,
so
the
good.
marketers are thinking, how do we get people to buy this? How do we get people to feel
Yeah.
bad? How do we get people to that? It's instrumentalizing and manipulating the human. So instead, I look at how do we engender a culture where certain attitudes and behaviors are more likely to emerge. So how do I, if you want the way we would say, how do we get people to realize social media is bad? It would instead be because that it would instead be how do I how can I reveal that the rules of social media are arbitrary constructions, designed to make you feel bad. And so it's like, how do I kind of denaturalize power? It's sort of the opposite of recognizing nature is recognizing non-nature. How do you pull back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz? So you see, oh, he's not actually in charge. This is a social construction.
Mm.
And I sort of look at it in these steps, like one is to denaturalize power, make power look arbitrary and weird. And second is trigger agency. Once you've seen that power structures are arbitrary, now you have the agency to rewrite reality as you would. And once you have that, you get to sort of my third idea, which is help re-socialize people. Once you've agency is triggered, you can't do it alone. You
Mhm.
end up doing it with other people. And once you're re-socialized and doing this stuff with other people, we end up cultivating awe,
Mm.
which is that.
Yes.
For me, I get awe spooning, but you can get awe looking at nature. Once you have that experience of awe, I'm sure you've worked on this in biophilia. Your cytokine response changes, your generosity changes, all this stuff happens because the experience of awe turns out is probably, you know, was a normal experience for somebody living in the
Mhm.
rainforest. They're just there with the frogs and the canopy and the sun, just in a state of awe.
Yeah, we have an incredible guy who lives here, Phil Tabb, who in our community, he was the land planner and he studied English village models and sacred geometry. But he has written books on, he has really worked with some of the people who are the biophilic design principles to like get awe added as a biophilic principle, right? That feeling of awe. But then he also, and Jen, are you doing a talk with him next week? One of his most recent books was Sacred Places. And so, talking about architecture, but again, it could be in the rainforest, you could be in Chartres Cathedral, you could be, one of his examples is seeing his grandson blow out the birthday candles on his cake.
Mm.
These that we can have, like I always think of an eclipse, like I've seen a couple of clips, like mind blowing, like everybody should go figure out how to see an eclipse. But there are these everyday moments. So looking for the awe in the everyday. And I do love that you brought that up. And I like that that's sort of the potential resolution for this change. Were
Yeah.
you gonna
At
ask?
least it'll feel good.
If nothing else.
I mean, it sounds sad, but everybody dies. You're going to die. I'm going to die. At least, unless you're a total Musk Thiel, whatever, crazy person who really thinks that we're going to live forever,
We're
whatever.
gonna figure
God
it out.
bless.
The singularity. We're all gonna be
Yeah.
in a chip.
Yeah.
You're all going to die. I mean, whether it's individually or whether we're dying as a civilization, and no, we're not going to make it another 20 years. It's really, really possible that we don't make it. But even then, it's like, what then?
Mm.
What then? You've fallen to the moment, be with other people. It's just, I feel like I've moved from being that's what I was talking about at South by Southwest this year. I'm shifted from being an agent of change to an agent of care,
Mm.
kind of from medical intervention to doula, palliative care,
I like it.
Yeah.
and it's not that I've given up, but I feel like maybe we should act as if we've given up. We should act as if we're all going to die, because then what's left? Then what's left is caring for each other. What's left is spending time with each other. Of course, we're going to borrow and lend stuff. You don't want to waste the remaining time you have working in order to buy a drill that you're not going to use.
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of get through, Becker and the denial of death and go, oh, we are going to die. What
Right.
time do I have left? What do I want to do with that time? What do I want to optimize for? If we all did that, that in itself might prevent the catastrophe.
Yeah.
It's the care. That's exactly it. Just the mindset of an understanding of why we should care as human beings, because that's what gets us through what's happening in the world right now, which feels so chaotic. But how do we get
Yeah.
back to the awe and the beauty? Like I always talk about, how do we see beauty every day because the world is so chaotic? Once we see the beauty, then it fills up that gratitude within us to then care, not just for ourselves, but how we treat one another, and then empathy. And that then shifts, I think, us, that
Yeah.
momentum. Be
And I
more.
think you can start from anywhere in that cycle, is the
Yeah.
beauty of it. That's the great thing about living in a world with so many problems and what seems like a vicious cycle of doom and despair. It means that anywhere along that cycle, you can do the other thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And the present day we're in, we're recording this, I guess it's the end of March. I can't believe it's almost April. And, the chaos that's happening around us and to us, or to many of us, one of the conversations it's been having is like, what can we do? How can I help? Or I'm doing all these things. I don't know how to do it. I'm hearing in the ethos, and I think there's a quote that I'm going to butcher, that I think it was during maybe Act Up, from thinking about other models of like to follow, is that they talked about joy, right? How do we celebrate joy in this terrible time? And I believe that the quote was sort of, I don't know if it was like, we were protested in the streets in the morning and we buried our dead in the afternoon, and then we, partied all night. And I think thinking that way, maybe that it's not just one thing that we have to just protest, or we just, it's like there are these, mentoring and finding the others and caring for them and taking care of them, because people are scared and terrible things are happening. And we can't, I'm sitting here in a, I don't know, room in this lovely neighborhood Like, what can I do? Right. So, again, sort of ministering to others or caring for them, finding your local. I think that was more of a statement than a question, but talk a little bit about local because I do think one of the wonderful messages that you have, and you've been talking about this for years, is like not only the local economy and the share economy, but really thinking about that from a community perspective of knowing your neighbor. And, one way is borrowing a drill. Talk about localism and how that, I don't want to say it's going to save us, but it really could change the way that we all live around the world.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it could save us. And even if it didn't save us, we'd have a better time,
Mhm. Mhm.
dying, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
talk to any
true.
self-respecting prepper, and it's not about building a castle with a moat and fire. It's about strengthening your neighbors. The
Mhm.
first thing a prepper wants to know is that their neighbors are also prepping. Because if they're not, then their neighbors are going to be trying to break into
Trying
their
to break
house and
in.
steal their batteries and tuna fish or whatever they got,
That's right.
you know, whatever however they've prepped. So it's kind of the same thing. It's really easy in times of crisis like this to think that we have to respond to every
Mm,
image on the TV,
Mhm.
to every figure on the screen. There's Trump, there's climate, there's Israel, there's China, there's the economy, there's so much, there's measles, and all right, what am I supposed to do about measles? It's really maybe we don't even know what's going on with measles. What do I do about Netanyahu. I don't
yeah.
know. I better watch. He's going to do a talk. It's at 3. I'm going to see so I understand what's going on. So I can implement a better Hamas policy, or I can decide then I'm going to quickly call my senator and say to drone this one, not that one. And it's like one thing I offered, and not facetiously, in a talk was, what if we dedicated 1% of us to really understanding these global issues, right? So in America, we take 4 million people, right? 1%. And they are going to watch the news or divvy it up. So we put, 200,000 people on drones. 4 million, just dedicate 4 million people. Is 4 million people enough to figure out the big top issues? I think so.
Yes.
So then, if you have 4 million people doing that, then the other 396 million people in America can start working on, how do we take care of each other? Where's the old people in my community that need support? Where are the kids that need tutoring? Who doesn't have lunch? Who doesn't have access to food? How does this work? And yeah, you're going to do it in your neighborhood. And if your neighborhood turns out to be wealthy, then you can start worrying about your neighborhood can take care of the neighborhood next to yours. That Scarsdale can take care of Yonkers or whatever it is, or Beverly Hills can take care of Compton. If once they've dealt, you go to the neighbor one. It's okay, and start taking care of people. And the more that you do for each other, whether it's borrowing a drill or teaching someone how to breastfeed their baby or tutoring a kid in algebra, the less people need to depend on the market's solutions for those problems. So you need to earn less money. So as AI takes over your job, you don't have to work as much because you don't need as much and you end up with maybe 80% of what you need or 90% of what you need supplied locally. You don't even need the iPhone as much in that world because you know your neighbors. You're spending less time on that. You're not doing social media, you're doing social.
Right.
And you've taken so much stress off government. You've given so much less power to corporations because you're buying less from them. You're needing less from them. I mean, yeah, I'd love there to be welfare and Medicaid and Medicare and social, a social fabric. And the more we're doing for each other, the more fun we're having, the less we're depending on that, the less,
Mm,
money those things need.
One of the things that Jen and I talk about it, and we talk about a little bit on this, but due to the plate, so like I run marketing for this community, and it's not just, I mean, I run marketing for it, so I think of it as a model for biophilic living, right? And so that's partly how it got me into this sort of interest. And And one of the things that I do really believe, and I think it's really interesting, is how the way we build and the way we've built over the past 70 years, right? With the car driving suburbs and then, all these huge front lawns and the driveway. And take my car into the garage and the garage goes down and I walk into my house and the mail maybe comes straight to my house. Like I just never leave, right? I've got my coffee machine, I've got my gym, I've got my big movie theater, I've got my backyard that's fenced off. I've got my little place, right? And I've created this like jail for myself, right? Where and most suburban neighborhoods have no sidewalks, right? And if they did have sidewalks, there's nowhere to go. You can go to the community center, but who's there, right?
Right.
There's no infrastructure, there's no civics, no community, no retail, right? Like it's a gated community and maybe a thing. And so one of the things that I feel really strongly about and feel it's really important is like how we build matters, right? And how we live matters, and that the built environment can really drive not only health and well-being, but the social community aspect. If you have sidewalks and your homes are pulled closer to the street and you are connected to nature, and like we have mailboxes that are centralized, so you have to go to the mailbox. It's like a little mail shed, and then you see people, and you've created like heat and energy, and there's a trampoline there, and maybe it's by the general store, and people call it, oh, it's, like Bloomberg, be like the new utopian, blah, 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 the Pinterest version of America. And it's like, that's great. Happy to have the press. But really, it's like, we're trying to say, gosh, developers, builders, capitalists, like there's a better way to do this. And they don't do it because sometimes it takes longer. It's weird, confusing. All of the policies are siloed. So that's sort of like one of my sort of soapboxes that I think the placemaking is really important. Do you ever like talk about that or think about that? Have you seen other examples? I mean, obviously like indigenous culture is fabulous, but in today, it's harder and harder unless you live in New York, like both of you guys do. You walk right out and you're just in it, right?
Yeah. Again, a lot to unpack there.
Sorry.
It's
So
a lot
yeah,
of
I
good
wrote a
writing.
book. I wrote a book largely on this called Life Incorporated,
Okay,
which
I need to
really
get that.
looked at the way America in particular was really built around the needs of capitalism and the corporation. So, and sometimes in a well-meaning way, it was after or the end of World War II when
Mm-hmm.
FDR and his accomplices at the time, Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, they were worried about all the traumatized World War II veterans coming back. So what do we do? How do we manage them? Because they didn't want these guys either becoming fascists and forming gangs or becoming communists and forming labor gangs. It's like, how do we? So they came up with things like Levittown. Levittown was the first suburbs in Long Island by the Levitt brothers. And if you look at the documents they were using to pitch Levittown to FDR, was about how it was designed for each house to be a certain distance from the other, for there to be no places for men to congregate, for it to, require a mortgage that would, be calculated just to keep you, occupied enough that you can't leave your job because, so it was sort of a way to create for everyone's benefit an easy and socially controlled society. I mean, where I live in New York, this place called Stuyvesant Town was the urban equivalent of the same thing. It looks like a housing project made for middle class people. And the buildings I live in, there's these buildings here in Stuyvesant Town for the enlisted man, and the bigger buildings in Peter Cooper Village were for the
Yep.
officers. They have 2 bathrooms in those units and 1 bathroom in these units. So the built environment is that. And then, people like Jane Jacobs came around and said, oh,
Mm-hmm.
look what happens when you let the built environment
Mm.
layer itself more naturally over time. You end up with little stores and big stores and apartments and this and mixed use. And, you can just walk to the grocery, everything happens. And there was a architectural movement I wrote about it really came around, I guess, in the early 90s, called the New Urbanism. And what they
Mm-hmm.
try to do is use the Jane Jacob principles, but in a completely master planned
Yep.
thing. So it's like
Yeah.
Disney's Celebration, and you
Yeah.
try to predict and recreate. I mean, and I guess it's better than nothing, but what you end up with are basically shopping malls with apartments over the stores.
Yeah.
And it's a very weird world because then everybody's working. So he's like, I work for Jamba Juice, you work for Starbucks. We go to, and we sell to each
Yeah.
other and get a, it's like, what's going on there? It's just a whole bunch of people having all their value extracted by these giant corporations. And then economically, they don't end up working in the long term. So the way you get what you're talking about is the social precedes the 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 model usually.
Yes.
I mean, so much of my work is about kind of putting the social back into socialism,
Hmm.
and getting rid
Yeah.
of the ism, which is, so the ism is like the Politburo deciding, how do we design this whole thing? How do we create this? Almost any lived environment could be adapted to, to what we're talking about. You even the shanty towns of like Soweto and
Hmm.
District 46 in
Yeah.
South Africa. When I went there way back when, they created social hubs. They had shebeens, these little bars in people's living rooms, and you can do it. I feel like, yes, some of these environments are more resistant to what you're talking about than others, but it still can be done. You just have to look at how do we work against that? Where do we put the farmers market? Where's the tool library? Where's the,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, we've got the farmers market, and we have a lot of no official tool library, but that is the ethos. It's very much we have like a secret, again using social media, secret private Facebook page, and that is the who's got Benadryl, who's got a car seat,
yeah,
who's got it, and that's fabulous. And so you could say that we're using the tools in the appropriate way. That doesn't mean that that page doesn't devolve into insanity. Sometimes we're people.
right, right. Someone sees an ad for the abducted children in the South, and then all of a sudden it becomes about Jeffrey Epstein and Obama and the secret,
Yeah.
Jewish
I
space
wish it
laser.
was that easy.
Yeah.
Some of it. It's like. So Douglas, I mean, I'm like your biggest fangirl. I mean, I'm sure you have
Oh,
others.
We've been
So I just,
talking. We've been
I
talking
could
about
talk.
you for 6 years,
I
Douglas.
know I have
oh,
been. I am obsessed. And you know who is Andrew Postman is like a friend of a friend. And so I met him a few years back, and basically I stopped talking about him and started talking about you. And he's like, "What's going on here?" But is there anything? I mean, I know there's a million things that we didn't touch on, but is there anything you want to sort of wrap with or share of like what we should be doing besides listening intently to you and being continually educated? And you provide
oh,
phenomenal curiosity, and your guests are fabulous on your podcast. And
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess in particular for biophilia, it's sometimes too easy to apply nature metaphors to our world in ways that are inappropriate because they're metaphors.
hmm
Fractals are self-similar, but they're not congruent. So human society may be like the roots of the trees in the forest, but they're not the same.
Mm.
And what happens when, I guess this is the lesson I learned from Team Human in writing that book, was seeing it, that it's being read aloud by Stephen Bannon on his show or quoted by the right wing people in Italy,
hmm
is the understanding of the human beings as part of a collective organism, um, is an equal opportunity metaphor.
hmm Yeah.
It works for us loving little compassionate people. It works. So too it works for fascists or um, any other group. So I think it's important we remember that, yes, we are part of nature for sure, but we don't understand nature for shit. So that any inkling we have about how nature works doesn't mean, therefore, human society must be organized like this. And all. I look at mushrooms and mycelia and the way they teach things and their compassion and all, and I get great lessons
hmm
from them. But at the
Mm.
same time, I'm not saying therefore we should use a mushroom model in our society. It's not.
Yeah, one size fits all.
Yeah. Well, we want perfect answers. We want solutions, and
Of
Yep.
we want it
course.
now, and I want it instantly,
Me too.
and,
Me too,
and we wanna
especially
put
as
things
time
in.
runs out.
Well, I do really
Exactly.
love that, the thinking about we're in this denial of death, and, like, what would you do? Like, if you've got 1 day, what do you do? And you got a week.
Right, what are you gonna do? Honestly, it's like,
Mhm.
I don't wanna die uploading my brain to a computer. I wanna die in
No.
my lover's arms, you know?
Yeah.
Yep. That's the
That's a
best
great
way
way
to
to
go.
end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
No
it is.
no
Literally,
pun intended.
literally and figuratively. Yeah.
yeah.
Douglas, thank you so much. This has been such a treat for us and such a joy. So we really appreciate your time.
No,
Thank
really.
you.
Absolutely. So thrilled to have you. It's so important what you're doing. Your work is incredible. And we encourage everybody to follow you, buy all the books. I'm going to go get Life Incorporated, um,
Yeah,
and
listen to
find the
Team
other.
Human. Come
Find
listen to
the
Team
other.
Human, it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, find the others.
Where are you? You're in some faraway place from here?
Yes, I'm in a secret place. I will not tell you. No, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, right outside Atlanta,
I
in
heard of
a
it.
neighborhood called Serenbe. And so it's based on a little bit of new urbanism from the density, but
Yeah,
everything's very sustainable. The homes,
yeah.
there's a ton of really a lot of layers to it. And it's really delightful
You'd like it there.
sharing with us. And I mean, Jen's been here a ton. She's here coming here Saturday.
Coming
We're
tomorrow.
doing a biophilic conference next week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And where does Jen live?
I'm on the Upper East Side.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we
I
could
know
visit.
Skytown really well.
Yeah, you guys
Yeah,
can
tell
hang out, but
Monica.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
you
you
have.
can
come to
hang
New
out.
York.
I'll come to New York. I'll come
Yeah,
to New
this
York and
is
hang out with
nature,
you
baby.
anytime.
Yeah.
This is
Anytime.
nature. You're
Anytime.
looking out the window in Skytown. I'm looking out on the Upper East, and it's pretty beautiful. So it's a good
Yeah.
Yeah.
day. It's a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
All
New
right.
York. Okay.
Thanks,
Cool.
Douglas.
Thank you
All
so
right, thank you.
much, Jen.
Monica.
Dreams do come true.
5 years in the making or whatever. I know you've been talking about Douglas since I met you in 2018, 2019.
I
The
know.
book in 2019, Team Human. I mean, we've been talking about him for years with Katrina, our producer, and I cannot believe our conversation.
And when I say I'm a fangirl, like I am not
You're like,
joking. And I don't know if that, how he took that. So I'm half embarrassed for myself. But 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 he really is
yeah,
such an incredible thinker and intellect and so wonderful communicator. And I really appreciated his turning, you know, I was even like turning on myself as I was speaking of like, I can't tell anybody what to do, but how do I tell people what to do? So I really appreciated his being able to redirect that.
yep, absolutely. That makes him that thought leader that he just really understands communication and words and language and also knows how to kind of dissect that in a way that I think is really interesting, but also beautiful. Because I think
Yeah.
at the base of his work is human nature and human connection. And he always goes back to that. So no matter
Yeah.
where we go or the people around him go, he always brings it back to center, which is human connection.
Yeah. And his work is so prolific that like I was like half embarrassed that I didn't know that one book about urban, so
I
I
didn't
Life
either.
Incorporated. I know. So I've got to go get that and dig into that.
Me too.
Um and I really will say for our listeners, the Team Human book,
Hmm.
it is a manifesto. It is wonderful. And, you know, I don't know if everybody's going to get the same stuff that I got out of it. When you come to a piece of content or you come to new information, it's really where you are
Yes.
in your life and your continuum of learning. But then I picked it up again last night and
Right.
read through it and looked at all my scribbles and highlights and circles. And, it's still resonated beautifully for me. And one of the things that I didn't bring up, but that I had like tagged to talk about was a quote of his that said, People used to believe in circles. Now they believe in lines.
Hmm.
And I just thought from a nature, the seasons, circularity. We talked to Sister Seasons the other day.
Yeah.
And now it's lines. It's all about next, more rungs.
Yep.
I'm not
Yeah.
even sure what else.
It just keeps going. and we're never happy with where we are. We always have to get to the next thing. And so he talks like recreating that narrative of what makes us healthy and well is not the next thing and the next purchase. It's really about sharing with your neighbors. But again, that's not very good for capitalism. So, but
No.
I get it. Yeah, that was a really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, and I'll sort of end with how he sort of laid out his 4, kind of concepts of denaturalization,
Mhm.
um, creating agency, what was it? Resocializing people, and then cultivating awe. And that, one of his things is like the state of awe may be the pinnacle of human experience. And guess what? The corporations, I mean, maybe they're going to try to, but like, I'm not finding it in a bottle of
No,
soda. And
no,
so
no.
maybe that's where we need to go.
I agree.
And I would love to dig in more like on consciousness too, because I think there's something there with the awe and the mycelium and the network.
Well,
So,
we can go on for hours about our conversation, but I think we're just going to leave it right there because
Jen, it was
fantastic.
so fun
It
to do this
was.
with you. Okay.
All right. See you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.